what to expect this legislative session, which gets underway tomorrow on Tuesday. For that, I'm joined by two of the best minds when it comes to state and local politics. A.G. Gancarski, Capital and Northeast Florida correspondent with Florida Politics. Welcome.
Good morning.
And Chris Hand, government law attorney and host of the Hand on Government segment on News4JAX. Welcome, Chris.
Good morning, Ann. How are you?
I'm great. And we want to hear from you as well. What are you watching for this legislative session? Give us a call at 549-2937. Email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Message us on Facebook and Instagram or tag us on X at FCC On Air. So there are currently more than 1,600 bills for the upcoming legislative session, ranging from artificial intelligence disclaimers on political ads to whether teenagers can work full-time jobs while they're in school. Chris, how many of these bills actually ever become law?
Well, relatively few compared to the total number that are filed, because, of course, there's a very significant process, lengthy process. Any bill has to go through the committees for both the Florida State House of Representatives and Florida State Senate have been meeting already, have to go through that process, kind of get to the floor, go through multiple readings there. So it's a relatively small number of bills filed. But I think, again, when you compare, for example, the number of bills filed in the Florida legislature to, say, those filed in the U.S. Congress, it's still a relatively finite number. So a good opportunity for Floridians and citizens who want to engage in the process to go take a look through those bills right now and understand what's being proposed. We now know for relatively certain what the agenda is going to look like because representatives and senators can't file bills after a certain date, essentially when session starts. So we now know the entire playing field. The question now is going to be what bills get priority and which ones are going to have to wait for another session.
And AG, what do you think is going to be the overarching narrative of this upcoming session?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be about 200 bills that pass ultimately. And I think most of the bills that we actually hear about and care about are going to be ones that have to deal with like social issues, have to deal with like signaling to the right. That's the way it's been the last few years in the legislature. You got supermajorities in the House and the Senate are both Republican. So you're going to see a lot of bills that in a more balanced legislature would be message legislation, like something that would be filed that, red meat to the base that doesn't pass. In this case, just like we've seen in previous years, I think you'll see some of these message legislation bills actually become law, which will create legal challenges and things like that. But, DeSantis, I mean, he'll be back from his campaign sooner or later, probably sooner. And he's going to want to score some wins just like he did in 2023. Kind of wish list legislation. I mean, a lot of stuff was actually accomplished out of his agenda then, but there's obviously more to do. And, the conservative base wants more and the business interests want more. And, that's who Ron DeSantis responds to ultimately. And
is his current campaign, is it going to continue to be a big motivating factor for the lawmakers in Tallahassee, or you're indicating you think that's going to be done sooner than later? Yeah, I mean, definitely for the next week, he's going to, make it a big deal because the Iowa caucuses are the 15th. He's got a State of the State speech tomorrow. Expect a lot of priorities, and a lot of priorities that he's basically trying to translate to the Iowa audience, to the New Hampshire audience also. So that one comes up 8 days later. But when I look at the dynamics of his campaign, the polling, the money, the messaging, it feels like they're kind of in a cul-de-sac right now. He's probably going to finish a distant second at best in Iowa. In New Hampshire, he could finish fourth or even fifth based on polling. It's really hard to recover from those. Nevada's got a caucus that's going to go Trump's way. South Carolina, you got a favorite daughter candidate in Donald Trump, so he's going to finish the district third there. So there's not a lot of path once you get past his first four states. So sooner or later, he'll have to come home and actually do the job of statesmanship and governance. I'm not sure he's looking forward to that. I mean, obviously, if you spend a year looking for your next job, you have to go back to the place you used to work, sort of like Fred Flintstone going back to Mr. Slate. You're not that enthusiastic, but, he'll play it out. I mean, he did this also 2016 when he ran for Senate. And, he obviously didn't get the nomination there because Marco Rubio got back in the race. So he did one more term in the House and, he'll recalibrate this time. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely disappointing for the people in Tallahassee who thought they'd go from, the Capitol to running the Commerce Department or whatever. And, all these people were measuring drapes, and it clearly is going to happen at this point. So the governor has a $114 billion budget to play with for the next fiscal year. He's talking about teacher salary increases, Everglades restoration, upgrading correctional facilities, which is in some dire need. But Chris, you've put together a list of some of the things that you think are particularly interesting. Let's start with one that our own Senator Yarborough is proposing in terms of the sheriff's budget and sheriffs around the state.
Correct. Well, Senator Yarborough has introduced a bill that would sort of make it clear that once the city council passes a budget, and remember, City of Jacksonville has about a $1.7 billion budget. The biggest portion of that budget is the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. What the Yarborough bill would do is say once council has passed that budget, the sheriff then has the right to transfer money within the budgeted funds that have been appropriated to the JSO that year without kind of further sort of involvement by the Jacksonville City Council. Traditionally, when there are budget transfers of a certain size, those have to go back to the City Council because, of course, under our consolidated government, it is the council that has the power of appropriations. This bill would, for the sheriff in the consolidated city of Jacksonville, potentially for other sheriffs around the state, would provide that transfer power exclusively to the sheriff, not to the council.
What would be the rationale for saying that the sheriff's budget is essentially his own to assign however he chooses without any oversight after that initial approval by council?
Well, I think it's very much in keeping with some legislation we've seen in recent years in Tallahassee. A couple of years ago, HB 1 passed, which essentially said that a municipality could not lower in that case, a police department's budget, and if it did, it had to go sort of before state government. That's been modified since then. But I think it's overall part of a trend to give sheriffs around the state and law enforcement officers total autonomy over their budgets, over legislative bodies.
Your take, Gancarski.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of something that locally we saw a couple of years ago. There was a move on the city council to hold half of the sheriff's budget basically in abeyance, bring it back 6 months later. Those kind of moves are what this kind of legislation targets, that upset the sheriff at the time when it happened. And obviously that sheriff is no longer here. We're a couple sheriffs past him. But the dynamic still remains and the concern still remains, especially with the Democratic mayor, that even though you've got a Republican supermajority in this council, you could still see somebody trying to play games with the sheriff. And Republicans, they love their sheriffs. They protect their sheriffs. They're key to them politically. They're key to the messaging. So that's what this is about.
Another bill that would appear to diminish local authority is by our own local Representative Sam Garrison, HB 1195, which would ban local governments from raising property taxes without a referendum and a two-thirds support of the voters.
Well, actually, what the Garrison bill would do, and there were a couple of different bills filed. The one filed by later to be Speaker Sam Garrison, who's scheduled to be Speaker of the House in November of 2026, would actually require a two-thirds vote by the governing body. So say the Jacksonville City Council, if it wanted to increase millage, pass a property tax increase, two-thirds of the council would have to vote. There had been another bill filed in the Senate by Senator Blake and Golia, which would have required a public referendum. He has since withdrawn that bill and filed a version of the bill to match Sam Garrison's bill. So both the Senate and the House have now one that's a heightened majority, say in the Jacksonville City Council, if it wanted to pass a millage increase.
But still something that even without a public referendum would set the bar a lot higher if a local government wanted to raise property taxes.
Yeah, I mean, it does that. It forces them to have that supermajority. And, as we know, looking at political campaigns, like anybody who votes for a tax increase, it goes through the distortion mirror and ends up on a mail piece or in an ad or something like that. There's already that political pressure not to raise taxes. When you campaign, you're not campaigning typically. I'm going to raise your taxes. No, you say you're going to keep taxes low, limit government, all of that. So, this is added pressure. But, I mean, as we've seen locally, if people need more millage, they vote for it, and they hold their noses and they do it. So I think the referendum one would have had more teeth than this one does.
Well, let me just add to that. And I mean, again, if you look over the history of consolidated government, there's actually been sort of a series of millage decreases for the most part. There have been periodic millage increases from time to time. But it's not just a theoretical issue, because one of the trends you're seeing around the country with the economy in a period of uncertainty, with the American Rescue Plan, the money that cities and counties have gotten from the federal government diminishing, you're beginning to see local revenues fall off around the country. So places like the city of Jacksonville or St. Johns County or Nassau County, a variety of other city and county governments could soon, in the next couple of years, find themselves in a very different revenue place where they were just right now or a couple of years ago. So a change like this could be, much more than just hypothetical, could have a real impact on, again, the ability and the autonomy of local governments to change millage. And that's just what this is ultimately about, is who makes these decisions. Is it a decision made at the city hall level or the county commission level, or is it an issue that's sort of decided in Tallahassee? And that's a tension we've seen in the legislature for, the better part of the last decade.
And Chris, what other bills that are being proposed that would have local impacts are catching your eye?
Sure, a number of them. One is there's a couple of bills filed that would impact municipally owned utilities. Our listeners have obviously heard of JEA, which is one of the largest municipally owned utilities in the state and the nation. Well, each year the JEA contributes more than $120 million to the city of Jacksonville budget. It's sort of a transfer in lieu of property taxes. There are bills before the legislature this year that would regulate and potentially restrict the amount of money that JEA could transfer to the city of Jacksonville each year. That would have a significant impact on the city of Jacksonville budget. About 7% of the city budget right now is paid for by that JEA transfer. So that's a very significant impact. There are a variety of other what are called preemption bills. There are bills that would require local governments to set up expedited processes for, say, approving building permits. And require them to reduce fees in certain instances.
Can I ask you to pause though? What would
Sure.
what's the rationale, the stated rationale for the bill that would impact municipal utilities like JEA?
Well, I think the stated rationale, and this has come up recently in the city of Gainesville, where they also have a municipally owned utility, Gainesville Regional Utilities, or GRU, and there was concern there in Gainesville that the municipal utility was contributing too much to the city budget. The city was relying too much on that utility for its revenue. And this is I think the stated effort is to try and find a way to right-size the relationship between utilities and city or county governments in terms of those revenue transfers. The great concern, of course, at the local government level is, again, this goes back to the issue of home rule. Who ultimately gets to make this decision? If a city owns its own utility, as Jacksonville does with JEA, as Gainesville does with GRU, the argument that local officials make is we should make those decisions as to what the transfer is, not someone in Tallahassee.
And so how powerful is the legislative delegation from Northeast Florida if you think about probably generally perhaps opposing the bill that would tie the hands of the city when it comes to JEA revenues?
Yeah, I don't see much opposition there. Because with Duval County's legislative delegation, it's a Republican supermajority. So it's very tough to marshal opposition to that. These are Tallahassee Republicans. You got somebody like Kim Daniels, who's a Democrat, who often plays ball at Tallahassee Republicans. So I think there would be movement there. I mean, obviously, when the Gainesville bill was up last year, I think there was some movement to protect JEA from the consequences of it. But, realistically, it's something where, a lot of the legislatures in the state, they like private utilities. They like FPL. They like TECO. They like things like that. So, with that in mind, like a municipal utility like JEA seems like a quaint concept. And, the consolidated experience where you actually have money moving from utility to the city. And that's something that these legislators don't understand particularly and don't want to encourage.
We actually have a lawmaker on the line, Senator Tracy Davis. Good morning, Senator. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. Good morning. Good to be here with everyone.
Good to be here, too. What's on your mind?
No, I was just chiming in and listening to the conversation as I have just arrived in Tallahassee. And it sounds like you guys were talking about JEA and maybe some of those bills that are floating around in Tallahassee, and so just wanted to jump into the conversation a little bit.
And what's on your radar this legislative session? What's the big bill that you're interested in?
Big bills that I'm interested in. Just still trying to make sure that the legislature is listening to our constituents throughout the state. So I have a number of bills to address the housing crisis. I have some bills to talk about property insurance because people are still hurting from that, and just trying to make sure that this legislature is still having a conversation around those measures and making sure we're still fighting for the everyday person.
Chris Hand, what about that? I mean, the issue of insurance has been a huge issue. The legislature has met now in a couple of sessions, special sessions, made billions and billions of dollars of concessions or payments to try to get the industry from just leaving the state en masse, and the rates from rising enormously. And as it stands, rates are still going up and are expected to continue to increase. And the departure of insurance companies has continued.
I think the right word is rates are skyrocketing. And I think people, that is one of the issues that everyday Floridians are feeling in terms of every time one of their insurance renewals come up, seeing that huge impact. What's been interesting about this session is you look over the list of bills and is, other than some like the ones that Senator Davis is talking about, there's a relative scarcity of bills this session to address the insurance issue, despite the fact that it is continues to be such a massive problem. The governor has something in his budget that would sort of waive taxes and fees and assessments on homeowners insurance policies this year, and that would provide a little bit of relief on a one-time basis. But in terms of additional structural reforms, efforts to provide relief to Florida property owners who are really suffering under these just ever-increasing bills, there's not a lot on the legislative agenda in 2024 so far that would seem to address that. We'll have to see if anything develops over the course of the session, but arguably that and homeownership, right, the cost of housing, those are two of the biggest pocketbook issues that Floridians are facing right now. But if you look over the list of bills filed so far, don't have a huge presence on the agenda.
A.G. Gancarski, what would explain that? I mean, as Chris Hand says, that really is top of mind for people if they're not able to afford their insurance, if they're not able to sell their house because people can't get insurance for the house. It's very much tied into resiliency and the risks of climate change.
Well, they did a special session last year. They put a few $1 billion into reinsurance, basically to bolster that part of the market. And they did what they call structural reforms. And the line has been, from Paul Renner, people like that, the House Speaker, that it's going to take a couple of years for those reforms to actually, show results for people. So that could explain the lack of interest legislatively in doing much more in insurance, because their argument is, well, we've already done this. We've got to see it work. You've got insurers coming into the market, and yeah, they're kind of shaky, but there are technically private insurers coming in. They are taking policies away from citizens, which is a priority of this administration. They don't want as many policies public as they have right now. So it's something where they're hoping that they have another quiet hurricane season again this year like they did last year.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, that's what DeSantis said over the summer, and it worked out for him. We'll see if it works out again, but it's going to take a couple of years to see if these actual reforms actually do anything.
Senator Davis, what do you tell your constituents when they're asking this very question about the skyrocketing cost of their insurance?
We again, AG hit it dead on the head, and you guys have a conversation happening here that people really need to be listening to. Just trying to make sure that I again, am louder every session, that we should be here making sure that we are looking for avenues to provide relief for homeowners instead of dealing with the governor who's out running for president. But you guys talked about the last few sessions, and literally that's in the last few sessions we've added $3 billion in that reinsurance that AG was talking about, and that was nothing but to ensure that insurance companies had a bailout. And unfortunately, they're still leaving the state of Florida and leaving homeowners high and dry.
So you had talked earlier about signaling in some of these pieces of legislation. Chris Hand, obviously, the Democratic representatives are in the minority, both in Northeast Florida and statewide, dramatically so. So there are some bills. One, I believe, that you had mentioned earlier was the Kamala Harris Truth and Slavery Teaching Act. That's a Senate bill with a House companion. On the other side, from Jacksonville, there's a Dean Black bill. What is a woman bill that would kind of, get back into the culture war issues over transgender individuals. So how meaningful are those?
Well, AG mentioned this earlier, but there is sort of a series of sort of messaging bills that are introduced each year. This has sort of been a trend we've seen in recent years in the legislature to, kind of address issues of gender identity. Obviously the bill you just referred to, the bill that is, for unclear reasons named after the Vice President of the United States. The bill is sort of a two-line bill, which says that, when we educate about the history of slavery, we need to make sure it's clear which party supported slavery in the 1800s and which one didn't. So, again, a lot of this is more about political messaging than it's governing, and again, reflects a larger trend. And it used to be that governing was the end result of campaigning. We've now sort of flipped that on its head in that campaigning is now sort of governing is sort of an instrument of campaigning rather than being the end result. And you're seeing that in some of these bills that are designed to appeal to base voters. Those are just two of the examples, but they have real world impacts. For example, you alluded to the monuments bill. Obviously, just in the last couple of weeks, Mayor Donna Deegan ordered the Confederate monument in Springfield Park to be taken down. Dean Black's bill would essentially, on a retroactive basis, try and penalize local governments that have removed historical monuments, including Confederate statues. And there's even a provision in that bill that would attempt to remove local officials from office if they, notwithstanding the bill, attempt to remove additional monuments. A lot of that is going to be subject to constitutional scrutiny. There are probably real conflicts with the Florida Constitution and language in that. But again, to AG's earlier point, a lot of this is about signaling and messaging and about, again, using government as an instrument of politics than rather the relationship being reversed as it once was.
AG, I want to ask you about that, but first we've got a call from Brenda in Jacksonville. Good morning, Brenda.
Good morning. How are you?
Very good. Go ahead. What's on your mind?
What's on my mind is I'd like to piggyback off of Ms. Daniels, and I appreciate her advocating
Ms. Davis,
for
Senator Davis. Yeah.
Senator Davis, I'm so sorry. Yes, for the advocating for the insurance reform. I mean, it really needs to be ripped apart and restructured. Insurance, tort reform, it all goes hand in hand. I am going on my third year here, and I'm just going to put my business out there. I paid where I came from. I paid $77 a month for 100, 300 full coverage, all the bells and whistles. I moved to Florida, that more than doubled. I bought a new car, it doubled again. I moved from the north side of Jacksonville over to the west side. I'm paying $75 more on the month just for that. I pay almost $600 a month for car insurance for 2 cars, no wrecks, no tickets. The problem is urgency. There should not be any credit-based insurance because we prepay our insurance. So why does credit play into that? This is the reason why there's so many uninsured drivers on the road.
Thanks, Brenda. Appreciate your call. Great thoughts. AG, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you look at insurance costs for, say, a car, I mean, cars are more expensive, parts are more expensive, repairs more expensive. That's a justification for all of this. You do have that preponderance of uninsured motorists out there, so you're absorbing risk for them. But yeah, the cost of private car ownership and auto insurance is a sticking point. It's not going to get any better, and it kind of makes you wish we had better mass transit in the state.
I also want to ask you, because you had noted that there's a bill that sort of speaks to how we finance campaigns. It's also put forward by a local Senator, Travis Hudson from St. Johns County area. That would let voters decide whether they want to end the provision that's been in effect since 1986 that it has companion financing for legislative office.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it would end the matching funds. This would be a citizen initiative, so if it gets voted up, gets put on the ballot to be in the 2024 ballot to end the the matching funds. The threshold, I believe, is 25,000. Doing this off the top of my head.
Again, I ask you,
But
what's the rationale there?
the rationale is basically to, I mean, what it really does in effect is it basically takes away, like, the idea that the public's going to pay for part of the campaign. It's something Republicans have objected to for a while. Of course, Republicans rely heavily on dark money, on PAC money, in a way that Democrats haven't figured out to in the state. So it advantages them to actually cut off that mechanism. But even in the 2018 governor's race, we saw Republicans use it. We saw Ron DeSantis use it, ran in 2018, things like that. So it's used by both sides, but functionally speaking, this provision benefits Democrats more than Republicans. So you can see the Hudson bill. This is last year in the Senate, so we'll see if he gets it through. Usually it takes a couple of years to get something like this through.
We have talked on the program previously about some labor law changes that could impact 16 and 17-year-olds, basically remove protections for them. There is this funding that the governor has supported to increase funding for corrections in the state, where the prisons, are basically described as crumbling. 75% of inmates don't have air conditioning, which is leading to some lawsuits and some, health impacts. Chris, what do you think are going to be the top bills that are going to be discussed, by the broader legislature?
Well, I think we've discussed a number of them. Obviously, the budget is always just crucial because, obviously not only the governor, but legislators care a lot about appropriations. But, when you look at the agendas from State Senate President Pasadomo and Speaker Renner, a couple of things stand out other than the ones we've talked about. One category, there's a bunch of bills filed on elections beyond just the one that sort of AG mentioned earlier that could have profound impacts on elections. The State Senate President has also prioritized what she calls the Live Healthy plan, which is an idea, Florida, based on some recent studies, could face a shortage of 18,000 doctors and nearly 35,000 nurses by the middle part of the next decade, by 2035, just because of a growing and aging population. So this Live Healthy plan has a variety of measures that it puts into place to both sort of expand the number of medical providers here in Florida and to help increase healthcare access. Of course, the one thing it does not do is expand Medicaid. Florida is one of the 10 states around the country that has not expanded Medicaid. There are some studies out there which suggest that could save the state a couple $100 million a year, might help somewhere between 800,000 and 1.5 million people receive health insurance in the state, and could generate some additional revenue for the state as well. So there's a lot of measures in that Live Healthy legislation, but Medicaid expansion is not one of them.
Well, so much to watch for this next legislative session. Chris Hand, A.G. Gancarski, Senator Davis on the line. Thank you all for joining the conversation and giving us what to look for starting tomorrow.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Thanks so much, Ann.
My pleasure.